Now, from the WCCO Live Desk, you're watching CBS News Minnesota.
I'm Maria Lazignoli. Thanks for joining us at the Live Desk. Wednesday morning, Minneapolis leaders addressed concerns after a chaotic clash between protesters and federal law enforcement. For context, this was the scene on Lake Street Tuesday in Minneapolis. Homeland Security says it was executing multiple search warrants and didn't make any arrests. They're calling the operation groundbreaking, but it's cast fear for many immigrant neighbors and community members that are still confused as to what was happening. Here's more from Minneapolis leaders.
First off, I understand the concern off the bat because I had many of the same concerns. Trump has created an environment of understandable fear, created an atmosphere where distrust isn't just the norm. In fact, sometimes it's appropriate. And so when I first learned about this federal action, which, by the way, was yesterday, I had several questions, and they're the same questions that a whole lot of members of our community had, which was first, is this federal action focused on immigration enforcement? The answer was no. Is our Minneapolis Police Department involved in it? The answer is also no. The chief can elaborate on this, but the work that our Minneapolis Police Department is doing, and in fact is charged with doing, is keeping people safe. And so when you have a standoff between people who are protesting and federal agents, one of our jobs is, yes, to keep people safe. Were we involved in the federal action? The answer is no. Are we involved with keeping people safe in our city? The answer is absolutely. And again, to be made clear, this was an action not focused on immigration enforcement, and there were no arrests made. The chief can elaborate, the sheriff can elaborate on what specifically this action was about. But for the detailed breakdown of who was involved and the agencies that were involved, you can certainly go to them. But I'll also say that my job as mayor is to learn the facts, get properly briefed with what is happening, communicate out accurate information to the public, and also provide direction to our respective departments to do the job that we are charged with doing. We shouldn't be countering the kind of chaos and panic that is pushed out by Donald Trump with our own brand of chaos and panic. We shouldn't see the opposite of extremism to be the opposite extreme. And so that's the work that I'm charged with doing as mayor. I take that work very seriously. And as to the question, what was I doing yesterday? The answer is my job. And I'm happy to elaborate on that.
I was here yesterday, same time conducting roll call when I found out of the operation as it was unfolding. You mentioned some comments that were made by council members criticizing how it was happening. I will say this, I had concerns, and I have relayed them to our federal partners. I think the manner in which some of it was handled was tone deaf for the situation. I think there's no question everybody learned yesterday just how heightened and how tensed the issue of immigration enforcement in this city is. That being said, when things are tense and heightened and spiraling out of control, you need leaders to step back and gather the facts and deal with the situation that was unfolding. And that's what we did yesterday. And it surprised me somewhat how quickly things escalated and the situation deteriorated. And we have a sworn duty to keep the people of this community safe. That doesn't go through a political filter. And so, I did the best I could to learn what was happening and to get accurate information. But there were a number of law enforcement agencies involved. And it was a task force, and I didn't even know that task force was operating, that had a variety of federal agencies. So it was, I knew a federal criminal search warrant was happening, but I didn't know exactly what. And we dealt with the reality of the situation on the city street. And ultimately, you can say what you want and point fingers and blame people for different things, how it happened, whether they should or shouldn't have or whatever. But the bottom line is, if a tragedy happened at Lake and Bloom yesterday, it doesn't matter who's at fault. The community loses. The feds lose. We all lose. And we are left behind. The feds can leave. We're left behind to deal with the consequences. And what I saw yesterday as they were trying to leave with, aside from the verbal things that were being said, but with things being thrown at them, in some cases, heavily armed federal agents getting into hand-to-hand situations with people who are protesting is not good. And that's something that was quickly escalating, and it is our duty to respond and try and de-escalate that situation. And that's what we did. People from the community were saying they didn't want them there. We responded to get them out of there and to try and resolve the situation. And it was dangerous. And even later in the day, the police had to respond later in the day because some protesters that were remaining had surrounded a resident's vehicle. And were, damaging the vehicle and refusing to let them drive away. So, I mean, there's no question that it had become a dangerous situation very quickly, and that we had an obligation to protect the people of this city.
I'll start with this. The information that came out on social media from elected officials was highly irresponsible. Mm-hmm. There were ways for them to have accurate information, and instead of getting accurate information, being impulsive and putting out things that could potentially incite riots is senseless. I will tell you, as far as the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, we do have a deputy that is assigned to human trafficking. We do have partnerships with our federal partners. I don't know of one person who is okay with human trafficking in our communities. I don't know of one person who's okay with drug smuggling in our communities. Yesterday's incident was a criminal investigation. So putting out the rhetoric that was a raid, it was not a raid. Putting out the rhetoric that was an immigration enforcement, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office does not participate in immigration enforcement. Elected officials have a responsibility to their constituents to put out accurate information. They don't have to agree with it. But do not mislead the public, causing more harm to our communities. We just got done with a roll call talking to these officers, deputies, troopers, agents about being safe, that they are held to a higher standard. Right now, we need the community's help, we need the media's help, and making sure that you support these people that are continuing to show up to combat the people that are trying to harm our communities. Again, who's okay with human and drug trafficking? When we're looking at just the statistics right now, ODs are going back up already. We have to do this work. I understand and I actually empathize. I know people are worried and afraid, as the mayor spoke to, as to some of the things that have been going on right here in Minnesota as well as across the country. What is important for people to know, yesterday's incident was one of 8 search warrants for a transnational criminal organization. It is not okay for people to obstruct law enforcement when we are trying to obtain evidence. It is not okay to try to prevent them from leaving. It is not okay. It did not look good. I get that, and we will deal with some of the things that happened that even I don't agree with, which is why I have an appointment already set up with some of our federal leaders that could have been done better. It was not led by our local agencies, not MPD, not Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, but that is what we need to start doing better. That didn't work well. This is the result of bad planning. And I want to implement ourselves. If you're going to be in our communities, let us be a part of that planning so we can do it the right way with less issues like what happened yesterday. 1 of 8 search warrants, transnational criminal organization. Some of the things that we are seeing are going across, again, state lines, out of the country. That is why the federal government has to be involved with those things. If you are okay with that type of stuff happening in our communities, come tell me to my face. Tell me you're okay with it. Again, I do understand why people were upset and why people were scared. And this is why we need our elected officials, our community leaders, making sure that they have correct information or disseminating correct, accurate information. There are a lot of unnecessary things that happened yesterday on all levels. We need to do better. Thank you.
When community members that are already rightfully afraid see some of these heavily armored vehicles come into their neighborhoods with people in fatigues getting out of them, look, I understand it. That's understandable fear. I had the same concern myself. When you have a Trump administration that is simultaneously creating this atmosphere of distrust, what you're going to get in these tense moments is more distrust. And so it's on us, again, not to counter that kind of narrative with more panic and chaos. It's on us to get the right and correct information out. As I said, I learned about this yesterday. And our job is to get the information, is to disseminate it correctly. And again, we are getting this information from other people also. And then it's to try to keep the city safe.
And is that something where both the police and the city hope that there would be like more heads up for these sorts of details?
Well, yes, but importantly, speaking for the city, we do not coordinate or work with ICE on immigration enforcement. And so if we're not working with them, we're not going to get a heads up necessarily on when they're coming into the city. Now, this was not, as the sheriff said, an immigration-related enforcement issue. But still, people need to understand what kind of heads up we may or may not get. To be very clear, we have a separation ordinance at the city that essentially, in general terms, says that our public officials, our police officers, will not be conducting enforcement of federal immigration law. That is what our standard is, and we're abiding with it. Now, we do have an obligation to keep people safe during tenuous circumstances, and when there is a face-off between federal agents and community members, yes, we do have an obligation to keep people safe in the moment.
We'll have continuing coverage of this story on air and online.